Welcome to the first part of your deep dive into one of the most prolific industrial designers on the planet, Marc Newson. Today, we're looking at exactly where it all began. Because, to truly understand a designer's work, you've really got to understand their roots. So, if you're revising his background and need to get the facts straight, you are in the perfect place. Let's jump right in.
First off, we've got to ask, what truly makes up the DNA of a world-class designer? Well, to figure Newson out, we're going to break down his origins into three core pillars. We're looking at his global perspective, his intensely curious mindset, and his incredibly gritty, hands-on methodology.
Let's start with that global perspective. So, Marc Newson is Australian by birth, but his mindset, it is entirely global. From a really young age, he was exposed to the wider world, traveling a ton as a kid, and later living in places like France and Japan. This international upbringing gave him a highly unique insight. It basically allowed him to understand design on a completely worldwide scale.
And this brilliantly illustrates something he realized super early on. Unlike industries like fashion, film, or music, which can get deeply tied to specific cultures or locations, industrial design is completely borderless. Think about it. A functional product designed by Newson works exactly the same whether you buy it in China, the US, or Australia. There's literally no difference.
But long before he was out there designing sleek suborbital jets, spaceships, or record-breaking sculptural furniture, he was really just a kid with an intense burning curiosity. He has actually said he was interested in design before he even knew what the word really meant. He simply wanted to know how things were put together.
The defining spark for all this? That happened when he was just 10 years old. His uncle gave him a watch. Now, instead of just wearing it on his wrist like a normal kid, young Marc completely ripped it apart. He was driven by this overwhelming need to see exactly how it worked inside. And then he actually attempted to rebuild it, piece by tiny piece.
And he completely owns this obsession. As Newson himself puts it, "I'm proud to say I'm a geek. Good designers are geeks." I just love that. It perfectly normalizes that intense curiosity, proudly validating that the absolute best designers in the world are, well, total geeks.
So what exactly makes up this geek mindset? If you're studying for an upcoming assessment, you definitely want to remember these core traits. Great designers are completely obsessed with the details. They are fascinated by the minutiae, and they are fundamentally driven by mechanics. Because, as he says, if you aren't fascinated by how a thing works, how can you possibly design it?
But that obsession didn't just stay in his head. It actually laid a really gritty, tactile foundation for his entire early career. He didn't just want to sketch out ideas on a piece of paper. No, he had this deep-seated, almost primal need to bring them to life, to physically forge them with his bare hands. In fact, right after finishing art school at the age of just 23, Newson took a massive leap. Rather than joining some standard corporate design firm and quietly working his way up the ladder, he decided to forge his own path entirely.
And he did that by hand-building exactly 13 highly unusual, totally improbable objects. As he fully admits, they weren't necessarily meant to be comfortable. They were really just a physical excuse to bring his vivid, structural imagination to life, using absolutely whatever means necessary.
Okay, let's dive into how he actually built his famous Lockheed Lounge. First, he visualized this seamless globule of mercury. Then, he grabbed a giant lump of foam in a friend's backyard workshop and furiously hacked away at it with a savage wire brush. We're talking violently tearing into it with white foam pieces flying everywhere. Finally, because he didn't quite know how to make it perfectly seamless just yet, he applied metal panels to it, which ended up recalling traditional aircraft construction.
And those bold, gritty, downright chaotic first experimental pieces? Well, they went on to break auction house records worldwide, launching an absolutely incredible global career. It just proves that world-class design doesn't always start in a pristine corporate studio. Sometimes it starts with a wire brush and a messy backyard. That wraps up our explainer on his roots, perfectly priming us for Part 2's deep dive into his specific products and ethical practices. But before we go, it leaves you with a pretty big question. What improbable idea do you have in your head right now that just needs a little bit of bare-handed grit to become a reality? Think about it. See you next time.